now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
Welcome back. It's Warrior Creed with the radical Maajid Nawaz as usual, and my bro, the infamous Usman Raja. Hey Usman, how are you, bro?
Yeah, good.
Want to apologize for the lack of recent radical media dispatches. I've been between countries, but things will settle down eventually. So today's show would have been based off an article, but the prep for it has already been done. So we go straight to the actual material, and the article will follow the show today. But I've just been catching up with a few personal matters on that front. But this is what we're going to talk about today, because yesterday was 22 years since the 9/11 attacks. And the show today is looking at the consequences of those 9/11 attacks. And when I say consequences, I'm talking real world consequences. Now, I know a lot of you online would have seen a lot of the declassified intelligence around the 9/11 attacks be pushed on your various social media platforms. I know you would have seen this because I've seen a lot of that too. Now, before I proceed in what I'd like to present today, I know a lot of you who follow our content would urgently be fascinated and desire to go into the weeds and into the details about, for example, on 9/11, what happened precisely to Building 7, by example. And what about all the various inconsistencies in those that look into this story and are concerned about what precisely happened on that day. Now, I'm going to touch on some of that, but the real purpose of today, and thank you as always for tuning in, is to touch on that, but to use it as a launch pad to say, don't forget, the whole point of looking at this was what? To stop real world crimes happening again. So when we look at this, our message here on Warrior Creed is going to be that you mustn't lose the wood for the trees. And one way of doing that is always remember, why were we interested in solving the riddle of 9/11 in the first place? And that was to see justice, to end the suffering that was inflicted upon innocent victims. And if that is the purpose, then when looking at, or when going down that rabbit hole as to what happened on 9/11, sometimes it's important to remember that those behind that attack and those behind the negative repercussions of that attack as it reverberated around the world, launching an entire decade of war, would like for nothing more than for all of us to start getting stuck in those weeds, down that rabbit hole that we went, to begin missing the wood for the trees and start arguing with each other about the precise scientific details of physics and architectural engineering. Now, to draw an analogy, that's the same with the COVID debate. I could sit here because I've spent 3 hours interviewing one of the world's leading medical researchers of the no virus theory. He hails from Australia, and it's on my Radical Media channel. And as I hope I am capable of doing, I'm quite, I think, able to repeat an argument once I've heard it for that long, 3 hours, and repeat it in a way that sounds as if I could steelman the argument. In other words, give its best case. So I could, in effect, sit here for 3 hours with you, telling you why there's no virus, and that the entire COVID thing, which it was a scam. But in addition, viruses themselves are a scam. Now, the thing is, my honest to Allah's truth answer is, I don't know about that because I'm not a virologist, and the man I interviewed was at least a medical doctor. That's not my field. But whether it's my field or not, the more important reason for me not to get stuck in that rabbit hole is because I want justice for those that were behind the entire crime. And that particular aspect is subject to inquiry, but it should be the kind of inquiry such as a tribunal that leads to justice, to making sure this never happens again, not to getting stuck in a tangent anecdotal debate and then losing sight of the entire reason we were concerned with this conversation in the first place. So to take from that analogy on COVID And again, I repeat for the sake of everyone's unity, and I swear by Allah on this, I have no side in that debate because I'm ignorant about virology, right? So likewise, I'm ignorant about architectural physics. However, I do have a level of common sense. So in a commonsensical way, one thing that viewers should understand about Warrior Creed is that my bro Osman and I come from the background where we've spent the last decade in the weeds of practically stopping terrorism. Because that's what we're interested in, practically stopping suffering. We've spent those 10 years practically trying to make the situation better while recognizing there are criminals trying to make it worse. So with that in mind, this entire conversation and the framing around 22 years on from 9/11, we put to you, why is it now, 22 years on, has it suddenly appeared acceptable to open certain questions around the 9/11 and its framing, whether it was a conspiracy or not? We don't have access to Epstein's client list, but suddenly online, videos of, for example, the way in which Building 7 collapsed, which I'm about to show you, are being pushed and are going viral. Not that there's anything wrong with those discussions. Again, genuine view. There's nothing wrong with those discussions. I enjoy looking at those discussions. In fact, I've made Building 7 the meme of this particular show. So not that there's anything wrong with those discussions, but like with any discussion, it can always be appropriated and subverted because that's how appropriation works. Everything is appropriated, including the beautiful and pure concept of oneness or tawheed, which empire, in the Christian context, the Council of Nicaea, and in the Islamic context, in Saudi Arabia, which empire appropriates for the purposes of power. So even the most beautiful things, such as the metaphysical concept of oneness, can be appropriated. Likewise, your curiosity as to what happened to Building 7 can indeed, and has been, appropriated for the purposes of subversion and steering it towards what? Well, steering it away from seeking the true perpetrators and the criminals themselves who invaded entire nations, who launched wars in the name of 9/11, but more forgotten because less visible, but no less important, those who used the excuse of this emergency as some form of pretext to incrementally curtail our civil liberties more and more, via, in the United States context, laws such as the Patriot Act, and in the United Kingdom, the Terrorism Act 2000. A while back, James Dellingpole, as Usman referred to last week, I believe, interviewed me for the Delling Pod. Now, if you look to that episode, the leading, Usman, bro, you remember this, the leading and first question James kicked off with was, do I believe that there was a conspiracy behind 9/11? And every year I will repeat precisely the same thing. You're asking the wrong question. The question for us should be, how do we get justice for the perpetrators and for the victims of that heinous act and everything that followed? Well, one of the ways to understand how to get justice is to remember the entire context of the episode and not just one crime. The context, what we're talking about here, and James knows this is not a criticism of James Dellingpole because the rest of our interview was about precisely this. The context is we're in the midst of a global palace coup. And the global palace coup works by using the Hegelian dialect. It creates emergencies by exploiting emergencies among peoples for the purposes of divide and rule. Once those emergencies are claimed, the direction of travel for the state in every single case is only one way, and that is incrementally towards more and more repression. That happened with the war on drugs. It happened with the so-called war on terror. It happened with the so-called war on COVID, and it's happening now with a war on climate. If you notice, every single emergency is put forward using their considerable means of propaganda to capture the minds of people so that you create a problem. That problem requires a solution. It's why I said Hegelian dialect. Take global warming. Massive fires in Greece. If you remember, we did an episode on this. Global climate change is the problem. We need carbon tax, 15-minute cities, security cameras everywhere, a stronger state, police to enforce that down, and a climate lockdown. That was quick. How did we get there all of a sudden? Then you later discover that those fires in Greece led to 79 arrests for arson. In other words, someone paid somebody to set those fires in Greece, but they didn't just pay somebody, they paid 79 people, according to the BBC. Now, go beyond that, and you ask another question. It's highly unlikely that 79 people by coincidence decided to set fire in the same wild region holiday resort of Greece. Who paid or blackmailed 79 people to set these wildfires? Then you go deeper and say, what do they want? Why are they setting wildfires? And you realize that these so-called emergencies, and it's a tragedy really that a fire burns so fiercely, it always is, but that these so-called emergencies are being used as a pretext to bring in, as I said, carbon taxes, more control, 15-minute cities, security cameras everywhere, penalized for eating too much meat, you should be eating bugs, and so on and so forth. Penalized for owning a petroleum car instead of using Elon Musk's Tesla electronic car. Surprise, surprise. I thought he wasn't a globalist. But the point being, and no, that isn't proof he is either, he does stand to benefit from this global palace coup. And the point being that, like climate, before it COVID, before it the war on terror, these are excuses used to bring in more and more emergencies. Now, if we get stuck in the meanwhile, looking into the weeds, legitimately, by the way, again, I repeat, I do it. I look at these videos because I find them fascinating. But we must remember why we're doing it. Now, with that said, there are a few videos I'd like to show you to take you through, everybody, viewers, to take you through this journey I'm attempting to articulate. But it did require that throat clearing first, because, bro Usman, as you know, it's incredibly tempting to get stuck in that conspiracy mindset about who's behind it. And of course there were conspiracies. Look, you're watching Warrior Creed. But the point is, the purpose is to uncover the truth so that we can pursue the mission. That's why we're here, to pursue truth. So with that throat clearing out the way, let me show you President Trump on the day of 9/11, how he reacted to the collapsing of the Twin Towers and Building 7. Have a look at this, and I'm going to take you through a bit of a video and graphic journey in conclusion. But here's President Trump on the day itself in 2001.
67 or 747 or whatever it might have been. How could it possibly go through this deal? I happen to think that they had not only a plane, but they had bombs that exploded almost simultaneously, because I just can't imagine anything being able to go through that wall. Most buildings are built with the steel is on the inside around the elevator shaft. This one was built from the outside, which is the strongest structure you can have, and it was almost just like a can of soup.
You know, Donald, we were looking at pictures all morning long of that plane coming into building number 2, and when you see that approach the far side, and then all of a sudden, within a matter of a millisecond, the explosion pops out the other side.
Right. I just think that it was a plane with more than just fuel. I think, obviously, they were very big planes. They were going very rapidly, because I was also watching where the plane seemed to be not only going fast, it seemed to be coming down into the building. So it was getting the speed from going downhill, so to speak. It just seemed to me that to do that kind of destruction is even more than a big plane, because you're talking about taking out steel, the heaviest caliber steel that was used on a building. I mean, these buildings were rock solid. And, you know, it's just an amazing thing. This country is different today, and it's going to be different than it ever was for many years to come. 67 or 740.
So that was Trump there. You heard himself, his suspicion that those buildings appear to have collapsed from explosives. That would suggest a controlled demolition. Now, Building 7, again, I remind everybody of the monologue introduction before we played these clips to contextualize what I'm showing you right now. But as recognition of the fact that this is fascinating content, I'm going to show you what, on the day it happened, what Trump was referring to and why he suspected on that day of 9/11 that it looked like there were explosives in the building, because this is the collapse of what's known as Tower 7 or World Trade Center 7, or the Salomon Brothers building, which was next to the Twin Towers. Now, the official narrative entirely accepts this building was not hit by a plane, by the way. The official narrative states that this building collapsed due to when the other two fell, the Twin Towers, they caused a fire, and the fire caused the collapse of Tower 7 or the Salomon Brothers building or World Trade Center 7 or WTC 7. It's known as all of those things. So I'm going to show you the collapse of Tower 7 and you decide for yourselves if this looks like this building collapse according to the official narrative by a fire. Remember, everybody agrees that this wasn't hit by anything. So why did it collapse? They're saying the fire from next door in the Twin Towers caused this to collapse. I'm just going to play it and you guys decide for yourselves. Now, the point of this entire show today is to say that happened, whether or not whoever was behind it, we're not stating for certain that there weren't something, strange that happened with Building 7. President Trump certainly on the day thought there was. Point being, that happened, and there are people, and I respect them actually, who go into some of the details of what exactly happened to things like Building 7 and demonstrate that there appears to have been some inside criminal, certainly lack of action behind facilitating or allowing for that to happen. That's fine. Respect to people that want to uncover the truth with regards to that. But as for what happened subsequently in the world as a result of that happening, one thing Usman and I, as I said, have been doing for the last 10 years and been consumed by, in fact, is on the ground, practical, real work, trying to make the situation better after that happened. And he doesn't need me to tell everybody, though I will, that we've both suffered incredibly in terms of material loss, in terms of reputational harm, in terms of sacrifices made to try and do what we can in the aftermath of how the world changed after that attack happened. Personally, I was in prison for 5 years after that happened, and I had no choice but to then get involved. And Usman, I met after trying to, we got together to try and work together to pick up some of the pieces after the war on terror. But whether or not, whatever you think was behind that collapse of Building 7, Tower 7 I showed you, what I'm trying to show you next are the sorts of things that Usman and I and Warrior Creed, what we would prefer that we remain focused on trying to stop. Now, what I'm about to show you next is Madeleine Albright on CBS 60 Minutes with Leslie Stahl. These are the real world consequences of what you saw happen in Tower 7's collapse. Now, the video I'm about to show you is before the invasion and subsequent dethroning of Saddam Hussein. It's done after the first Gulf War, if you remember, with the Kuwaiti invasion of Saddam Hussein. But the reason I'm showing you Madeleine Albright is because the weapons that were used in that war are alleged, such as the depleted uranium bombs, are alleged to have subsequently caused the death of 500,000 children through aluminium poisoning. Now, when Madeleine Albright was asked this specific allegation by Leslie Stahl on 60 Minutes, the following was her response. Before I show the clip, again, to reassure everybody, this is not a fake video. I've met Madeleine Albright in person. There's a photo of it somewhere floating around online. I've also been on 60 Minutes, interviewed by Leslie Stahl. Consider this as coming from somebody who knows all parties involved. This is not a fake video. The video itself is referenced even in my autobiography, Radical. And the reason I'm showing this video is to say the following, and that is that, again, even though this was before the invasion of Iraq, the same group that were behind the use of depleted uranium and the death of 500,000 children in Iraq, the subsequent invasion of Iraq, the subsequent invasion of Afghanistan, and the subsequent imposition of the lockdown of 70% of the planet, and the subsequent imposition of COVID mandates, and the subsequent attempt to impose climate lockdowns and climate carbon taxes in 15-minute cities and the social credit scoring system are the same cabal that Time magazine said are a cabal who are behind the global palace coup. That's why I'm showing you these videos, so we can remain focused on the real world consequences of uncovering these plots. And that is, we must act to stop the incremental inching towards more and more technocratic repression. Anyway, here's Madeleine Albright on 60 Minutes with Leslie Stahl.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it? I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it.
Again, it's not my business to try and guilt trip you. You can make what you want of that video. Our business is to present you our honest truth as we see it and be honest with everybody. That's why we are who we are, and it's why we try and follow the truth and are in love with Allah for that reason, because we try and adhere to the truth where we see it, and we're not perfect. But we've shown you this video so you can make up your own minds, because what we have to understand is that this global palace coup, this attempted takeover of our individual governments by this attempted global one government, has been something that has been planned for a long time using the pretext of these emergencies. So go back to before Madeleine Albright and look at George Bush, the president, but the father, George Bush Sr., and what he says about the New World Order, which, by the way, is another word, a synonym for the Great Reset, which is a synonym for our phrase, the global palace coup. Here's George Bush Sr., president. So these aren't just nobodies. These are incredibly relevant and important movers in this coup. Here's George Bush Sr., the president, and what he said about the New World Order and their attempts to bring it about. This is the summary of where this speech was given. A year after the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, US President George Bush Sr. told a joint session of Congress that he'd made a pact with Russia to create, quote, a new world order, which, by the way, are Hitler's words. The day was September the 11th, 1990. Oh, how interesting, right? Now I'm going to show you the video. Again, real footage. Don't, just take it from us. We're not amateurs here on Warrior Creed. This is real footage of George Bush Sr., the president.
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order can emerge, a new era. Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order can emerge, a new era.
So that's the plan. It's a global palace coup. It's been going on since before the first Gulf War. It's the use of emergencies to seize more and more power by the state for the purposes of the Hegelian dialect, divide and conquer, to keep the population weak and accrue more and more power for the stated aim, eventually, of this great reset, which is a technocratic takeover of every single government on the planet using these global institutions to create this one world government. And they use war, such as what you just heard their senior say, George Bush Sr., the president, say, to create this, to bring about this new world order. Now, this has been so exposed that some of these players and actors are beginning to at least express some form of remorse because they're so hated for attempting to bring this about. Here's Tony Blair saying, I'm sorry for his role in everything we're explaining to you, that he's saying he's sorry for Iraq. He takes the blame for the planning and the aftermath. And interestingly, he admits that the truth of his war caused the rise of ISIS, which is what we're coming to next. Here is some of the CNN reporting some of the text of the apology for those of you who like text. Blair, I'll read what's in the yellow here. Blair, I apologize for the fact that the intelligence we received was wrong. I also apologize, by the way, for some of the mistakes in planning and certainly our mistake in our understanding of what would happen once you remove the regime. On ISIS, go to the bottom there, Blair in yellow again. I think there are elements of truth in that, in whether or not his actions caused the rise of ISIS. I think there are elements of truth in that. Of course, you can't say those of us who removed Saddam in 2003 bear no responsibility for the situation in 2015. And it's incredibly interesting that he's feeling the heat so much that he's feeling he has to at least try and explain and apologize. But this is important to remember. They will only ever concede ground when they've already lost the argument. Never be satisfied with that apology, because it's like apologizing now for the lockdowns while trying to impose the climate lockdown or return of vaccines, as Biden just announced. You can sack the health secretary, Matt Hancock, and the governor of New York, Cuomo, all you like in so-called and alleged affairs when they were behind the care home deaths, and hope the story goes away. But those of us who understand what this cabal are doing in the form of this attempted global palace coup understand that conceding or giving territory once it's already been lost isn't really how you advance in this psychological war. So that was Blair conceding territory. Meanwhile, what had they done? Well, here's Obama moving, because we're going to move you through up to the present day with this. So that, remember, the purpose of today is to say, don't get stuck in the weeds. Don't get lost down the rabbit hole. Remain focused on the mission, which is to seek justice and truth for real world crimes that were perpetrated in the name of 9/11. Right? So here is, as you can see from these various graphics, Trump at the top there, reported by CNN, is accusing Obama of being the founder of ISIS. So I'm moving from Blair accepting responsibility that ISIS came about because of their actions, now to Obama himself, who facilitated the funding of ISIS by his actions. Trump's blaming Obama for this. And if you look at the bottom there, bottom right, let's start with that. How ISIS got weapons from the US and used them to take Iraq and Syria, by Tom O'Connor. And in that text, it states, but basically, I'll read the summary for you. It states that Barack Obama, by funding the rebels in Syria, those same arms and weapons eventually ended up in the hands of ISIS. But don't take that from me. That's not really, again, make up your own minds. And in making up your own minds, remember that this is what President Trump had to say about it.
Obama and Hillary Clinton, the founders of ISIS. They're the founders. In fact, I think we'll give Hillary Clinton the, if you're on a sports team, most valuable player, MVP. You get the MVP award. ISIS will hand her the most valuable player award. Her only competition is Barack Obama. I call President Obama and Hillary Clinton the founders of ISIS. They're the founders. In fact, I think we'll give Hillary Clinton the, if you're on a sports team, most valuable player, MVP. You get the MVP award. ISIS will hand her the most valuable player award. Her only competition is Barack Obama.
Now, I played it twice there, just in case anyone was in any doubt. That's exactly what he said. And if you remain in doubt, this is what he said when asked about what he said on CNN. And here he is again, President Trump, doubling down on the point.
Founder of ISIS. I know what you meant. You meant that he created the vacuum. He lost the peace.
No, I meant he's the founder of ISIS. I do. He's the most valuable player. I give him the most valuable player award. I give her too, by the way.
But he's not sympathetic to them. He hates them. He's trying to kill them.
He was the founder. The way he got out of Iraq was the founding of ISIS.
Hi.
Now, the purpose of this is to draw a straight line for everybody from all of these states of emergencies, the divide and conquer tactics, to the way the state behaves through the Patriot Act, through invading Iraq, Afghanistan, through the Terrorism Act in the UK, to acquire more and more state power for the purposes of what? And that's what we're saying, the global palace coup, or the new world order. Remember, it's the very same people that were involved in all of these things. And to remove any doubt, some of you may be thinking, what's the war on terror got to do with the war on COVID? How's Maajid's mind working these days? To remove any doubt, here you go.
You need the data. You need to know who's been vaccinated and who hasn't been. Some of the vaccines that will come on down the line will be multiple. There'll be multiple shots. So you've got to have, for reasons to do with the healthcare more generally, but certainly for a pandemic or for vaccines, you've got to have a proper digital infrastructure. And many countries don't have that. In fact, most countries don't have that. You need the data. You need to know who's been vaccinated and who hasn't been. Some of the vaccines that will come on down the line will be multiple. There'll be multiple shots. So you've got to have, for reasons to do with the healthcare more generally, but certainly for a pandemic or for vaccines, you've got to have a proper digital infrastructure. And many countries don't have that. In fact, most countries don't have that.
There you have it, folks. The architect of the invasion of Iraq on this side of the Atlantic, our very own Tony Blair, telling you he wanted to use the next emergency, the war on COVID, for the very same thing, introducing digital ID. I'll tell you, as a matter of fact, Osman will remember, that's the same Tony Blair that wanted to introduce national ID cards during the war on terror. This is our point. They're using every single emergency for the very same thing, to gain more and more state power and take more and more of your liberties and your rights. And my last point, and I'm going to hand over to my bro to comment as well. My last point is what's next. And this is why it's so important to remain focused on the vision, guys, because if you get stuck in the weeds debating, which is, again, as I said, fascinating and not something I would disparage. But if you get stuck in the weeds debating architectural physics and the nature of how buildings collapse, if you get stuck there, you'll miss what's coming next from this cabal. Now, I'm not saying this is definitely coming next, but I'm saying be prepared for who they're going to try and field, the representatives of these globalists, who they're going to try and replace Biden with, because everybody can see that Biden isn't up for the job going forward. And they, remember, this is a mono party. They are in both parties. I was going to say this problem is biplaned. It's, what word I was looking for, but it's on both sides of the political aisle. So whoever they bring next, it could be a rhino, a Republican in name only, or it could be a dino, a Democrat in name only. It doesn't matter. The point that matters is whether they believe in neoconservative foreign policy, invading other countries to solve problems, whether they believe in spying on every single individual on the planet using the technocratic state. That's what matters. So in that light, let's not get stuck on the nature and reality of architectural physics and whether or not and how buildings collapse. Fascinating as that subject is, I've got many architecture friends, and I'm sure I could have dinner with them and talk to them about that. But let's remain focused on the vision, and that is the real world problems and consequences that this cabal is creating. So what's potentially next? Well, one of the angles is what's being reported by Michelle Obama's biographer, Joel Gilbert, who believes that Joe Biden is done, which is pretty much a statement of the obvious, and that Michelle Obama is being prepared by the dinos, Democratic in name only, to run for president after Biden is taken out. Now, we've said before on Warrior Creed, one of the ways in which he could and quite easily and probably will be taken out is via his son, Hunter Biden. All that cover-up around Hunter Biden's laptop and all that baloney is true. Right? All of it is what's actually on the laptop. And you're seeing over the years all of that come out when originally we were saying that on LBC and got canceled for it. So at the time of the story breaking, while Twitter was banning the New York Post, we hosted a comments editor on the New York Post on live national radio. So now that that story is accepted as being true, what's likely going to happen is that is going to chase Biden, the president, because he is complicit with the funding, with the 10% kickbacks. He is the Mr. Big Guy. So what's likely going to happen, he's going to be complicit in the bribery through Burisma in the Ukraine and the entire Ukraine war saga, which is collapsing on their heads through the FTX scandal and Sam Bankman-Fried. Biden cannot escape that scandal that's chasing him. And so whether it's a health incident and he collapses through sudden death, died suddenly, or indeed he resigns because of the impeachment waiting for him in U.S. Congress as soon as the Republicans retake both houses after the primaries. So ultimately, whichever way it happens, that's not the point. The point is what it appears that the dinos want to field from the select choice of globalist candidates as their choice could be somebody like Gavin Newsom, current governor of California, and Michelle Obama, Obama's wife. And that's why it's important to understand who this cabal is, who they choose as their representatives of globalist, neoconservative warmongering, who their friends are and what they're going to do next, instead of getting stuck in the weeds. The whole point of remembering 9/11 is to remember, like COVID, how this emergency was used to deceive us all. So let's not get deceived while attempting to uncover the deception. It's important to remain focused. So this is Michelle Obama's biographer stating exactly that they're grooming her to be the next candidate against Trump.
Allegations that have come out in the media in the last few weeks really were around for years. David Garrow's book that had the quote where Obama said he makes love to men in his imagination came out several years ago. And of course, Larry Sinclair was from way back in 2008. So the fact that these are coming to the surface tells you that I think there's something going on in Obama world. And I make the case that I believe that Joe Biden is on his way out. I think that's pretty much the consensus. Nobody really believes he'll be the candidate in 2024 because of health, because of corruption, because of his terrible record. And I make the case in my film and book that Michelle has been pretty much copying Barack Obama's path to the White House. Barack had a voter registration organization in Chicago called Project Vote before he ran for president. Michelle founded something called When We All Vote that's supported by the Soros Group for $26 million. She's been running around the country registering people for several years. Barack wrote 2 autobiographies, Dreams from My Father and The Audacity of Hope. Sure enough, Michelle wrote 2 autobiographies, Becoming and The Light We Carry. They're also on Netflix as TV specials. And of course, Barack was the keynote speaker who introduced John Kerry at the 2004 Democrat convention. Sure enough, Michelle introduced Joe Biden at the 2020 Democrat convention.
And there you have it. That's what that's what we'd like people to focus on. Start there by all means. Start with Tower 7. Start with wondering what on earth happened on that day. But 22 years on, isn't it about time we had justice? Because we all know who was behind it. I mean, they're right in front of us, as plain as day, including by the way, I don't just mean the politicians, right? Including those in the global institutions, the Klaus Schwabs of this world, including the CIA, including the Saudi regime. We know who's behind it. So now is time not to get stuck in the weeds, but to focus on gaining real world justice for real world crimes committed against real world victims and children, such as those 500,000 dead in Iraq and much more in Iraq and Afghanistan and Yemen and Syria and Pakistan in the subsequent war on terror. And forgive me if there's any country in that war on terror list I forgot. But Osman, over to you, bro.
Okay, I think the first thing to look at there, Maajid, is we talked about conceding territory, and that's why you've got the apology coming in.
Yeah.
I think a more accurate point for us from Warrior Creed would be to say that once the territory has been terraformed, so once you've achieved what you've wanted to achieve, you apologize for killing the Aborigines.
Yeah.
So that's the first point, because what we've got here is we've got ops managers. So when you see the Klaus Schwabs, when we see the Tony Blair's, when we see the Bidens, previously in Tony Blair's time, you could look and you could say, actually, maybe this is a competent prime minister. The look, the speech, the presentation. But what we've seen with this is that as you stop caring about the brand new car that you were, so say you've bought a car, you keep it in the garage, you polish it, you wash it, you wax it. Yeah. Let's say that was the 90s. What we've had from the globalists' perspective now is a very obvious movement with the fourth industrial revolution of the recognition of information no longer being reliant upon state media.
Yeah.
And what happens then is all of a sudden your audience expands.
Yeah.
So with that fourth industrial revolution, one of the first successful tests of that was being able to get 67% of humanity behind closed doors. Now let's get back to 9/11 with this. When we look at 9/11,
that's a good point. We just did that point about the lockdowns.
When we look at 9/11, what we see with this is you remember. I remember exactly where I was when it happened. I was in the cafe of Peacock's Gym as we watched the second plane hit the building. And then I was it was about 20 minutes after everything, but we're carrying on with training. I'm in the ring with Kamal Locke. We were doing pads and we were discussing what was going on. And I remember in that discussion, I was saying to him, look, this is, for me, or for us, Maajid, it was a continuation of violence, wasn't it? It was the violence begets violence begets violence. Because one of the things we're taught is that every victim represents every other victim. So the video of Madeleine Albright and the depleted uranium, the trade sanctions, that video is a video that you can go into any mosque around the country and find a child who wasn't born in that period and you've got a 70% chance that some kid in some mosque has got that video on their phone.
Yeah.
This is not something.
You and I grew up seeing
Yeah.
that clip and others as well, but that one in particular, we grew up watching that.
Yeah, we grew up watching it, Maajid, but I'm talking about from the perspective of kids now.
Yeah.
That is something that's not something that's going to disappear. That will be there forever. That video is used as an example. But the point is here that what we have to look at with this is when you look at it from a problem-solving perspective. Now, guys, let's bring this all in. Let's bring this all in. If the globalists are looking post the nation state phenomenon with the fourth industrial revolution and the ability of news to be ubiquitous, yeah? So news goes everywhere, yeah? They've recognized that. So if we're looking at causes, surely if you're looking at causes, you would reverse that back. The same logic would be used to say, okay, what has happened in this symbiotic system to lead to different events? And so the first point with this is with 9/11, what we see is the official start of what we call the global war on terror, which brought in certain things, certain policies, certain restrictions that are now there. Yeah, they were first put in, and you could see as wet concrete, and now it's solid. It's immovable.
Yeah,
they're immovable policies,
such as the right to silence at ports of entry and exit in the UK, like Heathrow Airport, due to Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act 2000. It's now a criminal offence to remain silent when questioned by authorities for no reason presented other than they want to ask you questions.
And they can arrest you for things that are. So if there's a document that it could be legal right now. Today it could be legal. Tomorrow it could be made illegal for you to read that. And if you read it and you're caught, you get arrested, you get sent to prison.
Yep, that's called retroactive legislation. It should be constitutionally struck down according to the original principles of law.
But the thing is with this, it's been solidified and it's part of the structure and it's accepted. Now, the point is with this, the global war on terror brought in a framework and brought in an industry which was then able to warm up on the targeting of a huge minority group within Europe, within America. They were able to come in and look at what it is that you're learning and say, okay, we don't agree with this. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we're talking about you see, this all connects because we're talking about building 7 up there. Yeah.
Yeah.
And we're talking about building 7 and we're talking about you want to go and find out what happened. Yeah. What we're talking about here is we're talking about your confidence in the democratization of information, which means that, so let's break the words down, that you as part of the mob have access to information. But what's been demonstrated to you just from the other day, just from COVID, is that you don't have access to the information. And even the manipulation that's happened that you feel like, I'm not going to get hustled again. Well, does that pill really take away your headache? One pill makes you taller, one pill makes you small. This rabbit hole that you think you can navigate, guys, you were put into the rabbit hole when we went into the nursery. So
that's real life.
Yeah, that's real life.
By the way, welcome to what life is actually like. It's full of very dark underbellies, like the ones that those who want to go down this rabbit hole on 9/11 suspect happened. All of life is like that. So you're right, by the way, it's not going to remove the headache.
Yeah.
Because when you realize all of life is like that, very few things actually liberate you and remove that headache.
And the thing with this is that now we get to this point. You see, this isn't a point where we're saying to you, look, you need to take down the Matrix. It doesn't work like that, because there's a very interesting point here where, and this goes back to, there was a certain group that used the concept of this poisonous word khilafat. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maajid, I'll educate you on it.
Yeah.
You don't know much about that group yet. So there was this group.
There were recent arrests in Ukraine, by the way, members of Hizb ut-Tahrir just last month.
No, but there's a point here, Maajid, that making with this. There is that I remember, as much as I never agreed with those guys, Maajid. Yeah, the rest of them are all
those guys with us guys, man. It was
but no, those guys
in Britain.
You know you were a tourist there, Maajid. You came in with your hip hop and
you
hustled them with street. Let me put this out there. Maajid was the only street guy among a bunch of students.
They're basically middle class university graduates.
Yeah, and he hustled it with that's why he hustled it with street knowledge.
They never met any. Honest truth, you're right, by the way.
Yeah, I know.
They'd never met anyone like me.
Yeah, exactly.
Really impressed. But the thing is, the weird thing, bro, is that we're both born in '77 and have a very similar background. And let me tell you something I've never said to you before. My middle name is Usman.
I know. Yeah, that's why.
It's weird.
That's why I know the hustle, because I'm not old, so he hustled it there. And that's what I was looking at. I was going, oh, so he did. So because there's us, isn't there? And then there's the hustle. There's like,
where did you hustle it in the fight scene?
What? No. Well, all the whole thing is it. It's like remember with the whole like Dawa scene and all.
Yeah.
Because remember, the Dawa scene's the same thing, isn't it? But the point being with this, that there was this idea of circle of influence, like from your home outwards. Yeah. But the point I'm making with this is, let's get back to this idea of thinking that you can learn something by going to those very same sources, rather than the idea of like dismantling something critically, even at a local level with the people you're sitting with.
Yeah.
Isn't that...
Wait, explain that for people. They're not going to get so... let me help by just saying, on that local level then, what's the relevance of everything someone would have heard up until this point in Warrior Creed to translate it on a local level with someone directly they're speaking to?
So what ends up happening with this is that everyone wants to get you involved in their little club, because what happens is, if we've got the evil at the top, so it's the colonial mindset. If we've got the evil at the top, what happens is the victims of that evil take on the same structure as the evil, even in trying to do good, because they see that evil worked. Yeah. But the reality of this is that in order to fix things, it's very simple. If you look at the needs of being human, it's very simple. So what ends up happening is, at a local community level, as soon as we get community concern, what is it that you want? Okay, we want a clean area, we want a safe area, and then as you start working outwards from a problem-solving perspective, then you'll get each tool that you need will become apparent. But the problem here is, when we're analyzing this...
Wait. So in other words, you start locally with your immediate circle of influence before your circle of concern. In other words, don't go and blow yourself up in Iraq just because you oppose the Iraqi war, right? Start with your neighbor, make sure they have food, make sure they're looked after. The minute you start doing that, you're saying once you start doing that, reality opens itself up and other solutions begin to appear in themselves.
Because reality is collective. What we don't want to get stuck in, guys, is it. And Maajid, we had this conversation yesterday about, I sat down and revisited Matrix Resurrection.
Yeah.
And it was interesting because there's a point where Agent Smith talks about the complacency with binary reality. Yeah, dark and light, black and white. So it's referring to an idea of individuality. Yeah, Agent Smith is saying, I want to be the individual. But it's an interesting point, because the people who wrote The Matrix, so the Wachowskis who wrote The Matrix, they saw something that was wrong, saw their own feeling of isolation or detachment, and thought that they would come to their own unique conclusion, which was what? To go from male, to transition from being male to being
trans, whatever they became,
whatever, fake leather, pseudo, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Now, the point being that what we get with this is, if we're talking about the external, when you're separating yourself, there's an issue, because what you're actually looking at with the separation of everything is suffering. It's very simple. When we start breaking this thing down, you start looking around, you start saying, why is there violence over here? Because there's suffering. You don't have an Albanian mafia if they don't have, if you took those guys and gave them food, gave them everything, and separate, there's a level of consumerism and hoarding which is in the imagination, which has nothing to do with satisfaction and tranquility. Now, you see, it's the human being's need is very simple. It's to be connected, to be tranquil. And this is why, when we talk about even the might is right concept, that 9/11, when it happened, if you went to the Middle East, when we used to do the presentation, so when we did the presentation for these, strangely enough, it didn't do it on purpose, but when we trained the LAPD guys, the LAPD counterterrorism guys,
remember those guys?
I had the presentation up on the board. Do you remember? I've got a slide where it starts off, and what I explain is, I say, okay.
Was that was Michael Downing? Yeah, I've just pulled him up. Chief Counterterrorism Division, LAPD.
Yeah. So what we did is we did a massive presentation at the Skersball Center in LA, and when one of the slides was a slide going back 1,000 years, and I was saying, okay, instead of looking at these populaces as nations, let's treat it as a child, and what we call reference behavior from trauma. So what we call cultural framing. So we talked about, we pick a group and then go through the history traumatically, and then just ask the question logically, where do you think these people are now? Where is the thought process? Yeah. It's a very simple exercise, very, very simple, because what you're then doing is you're talking about cause, effect, and what the idea of trauma has put into the mind of that group from a point of view of determinism. Yeah. So then when we went back to the room, and you have to remember, this isn't me imposing an idea of symbiosis on the group. This is people answering back logically.
Yeah.
What you start getting with this is, well, surely the answer would be an idea of integration, which is interesting now, because if we talk about,
you mean the answer to terrorism and extremism?
Well, the answer to all of the problems, which is exactly what the globalists are talking about.
Yeah.
What we get with this is you have the problem solution aspect. Yeah. Now, the reason I'm talking about this with 9/11 specifically is because depending on where you look at it from, depending on where you bring your witnesses in from, you either get told about why it happened, or you get told about the effects of it, or you get the ones that are comfortable. Or now what we've got is, now we've got 9/11 being talked about almost as a pastime from a conspiracy perspective.
Well, that's the one I was warning against. Why I did my monologue, because that's actually what I think is going on.
But the problem with it is that trick. Once again, that trick is the one where the magician is getting you to concentrate on what he's doing with his hand as he pulls the rabbit out.
Precisely. Imagine it's a magician who is revealing an old trick only to pull a new trick over you. while revealing to you the old trick.
And then what we get with this is you don't need to know how the magician did it. You just need to know that he is a magician.
Yeah.
Yep. Now, it's interesting here because once again, when we get to response and reaction, where do we get the lesson of this response from? We get the lesson of this response from Moses in the court of Pharaoh.
Yeah. That's a good analogy to the magician, actually.
And it's the whole point is that from the behavioral understanding perspective, it talks about sorcery. Yeah. So what we're saying here is that we don't need to know what the sorcerer is doing, as long as we know that he's a sorcerer.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then what it then comes down to is, if we're going to still play his game from the democratization of information perspective, instead of coming back to a more natural response. Because the problem we've got here is that we're now at a point where we're talking about Biden, we're talking about Michelle Obama. My slip of the tongue.
Listen, Obama's made that slip of the tongue himself.
So
multiple times.
I mean, you don't know.
I haven't put up a video. I've got videos where he's like, my wife.
Look,
sorry. It's just
whatever rocks your boat. If it is, then he's doing. He's not.
Oh dear. Some people, you know what? Some people know exactly what we're talking about, and some other poor bastards have no idea what we're talking about right now. Sorry, guys. If you don't know what we're talking about, we're not going to go into it for you.
No.
You're just out of touch. Sorry.
It's too low level. Google it, and you're
looking for a photo I took just to pull up, just to be a bit cheeky. But carry on talking.
The point I was making with we're talking about Michelle Obama, we're talking about Biden, we're talking about Trump. But really, what we're seeing now is we're seeing the movement of capital. We're seeing the movement of corporate interest shifting.
Yeah.
Yeah. These nation states are becoming, they're obvious. They're showing you that they don't care about the car anymore. They're showing you the car hasn't been kept in the garage for a long time. It's been left out there and the rats have been eating.
In other words, they don't care that you know that what they're up to.
No, and what I'm talking about, the nation, I'm using the analogy of the nation state as the car.
Yeah.
Because previously, when we had a Tony Blair and a BBC, and when we had Bush and CNN, Maajid,
yeah.
When we had legacy media and the nation state and the power that was there, there was more effort and more interest put into that. Yeah.
Into propping up the illusion.
And propping up the illusion. And I was asking this question of myself, Maajid, thinking, wait a minute.
Yeah.
The US has still got, in terms of military power, it's got huge military power. Yeah. But then in a conversation, one of our friends was explaining to me about the use of modern technology now, and how modern technology has democratized warfare from the perspective that even use the example of Russia going into Ukraine and the massive convoy that Russia had that was going into Ukraine. And he said everyone worldwide who was looking at it was saying Russia will take Ukraine in a couple of days. And the way that the Ukrainians, who were described to me as literally like vigilantes, these aren't trained, they're not trained special forces. It was explained to me like vigilantes on mopeds with drones were able to stop this convoy. And then we had the concept of the private armies now, Maajid, like Blackwater and all of this. Now, what we've got now is with this democratization of warfare, one of the questions that I asked coming from how having grown up in a military area in the UK and seeing the decrease in funding for the UK military and all of this, and the decrease in bases, was like, why is this happening? And now you can start seeing, okay, because with warfare now, even the paradigm has shifted. The paradigm has changed from that military. So what we're getting now is the technology for warfare, the methodology of warfare has changed. So what we've seen with Ukraine with this is that you've had guys that literally, Maajid, stuff that I could buy off the internet.
Yeah.
So the drones that they were using were things that I could buy off the internet. And they used those very drones on mopeds, armed in a certain way, to come in and destroy that convoy.
You've just touched on it. The internet has changed all these things.
Yeah. So what we get with this now is that when we're looking at this phenomenon, and guys, while you're listening to this, if you can start feeling the butterflies come up, that's the reality. Why do you think Hollywood is now the carpet is being pulled out from under it? Because we're moving over to a reliance on this, on the digital media. And then what happens now is the truth factor of the digital media. You see, they've already come in and appropriated
precisely
the idea of this idea of truth seeking. Yeah,
remember, underline this, but everything is appropriated for power. Underline that.
Yeah, well, this is, you have to remember that your concept, this empowerment that you feel, is a trick. And the trick is this idea of you live in this state of democratization of information, where your own confidence of, I can find something out. And remember, we're not taking away your ability. We're not saying to you, no, sit down and shut up. But what I'm saying to you is, all of this is connected to your methodology of response and reaction. If you've literally got a fork in your hand, and I'm handing you, the problem you've got is soup. Yeah, when you saw 9/11,
can I just take a second there for what I think you've said for people as well, right? Which is, if every problem looks like a nail and you've got a hammer. In other words, if these problems that are created, if we react to them in a way that brings about the precise solution that the causer of the problem wanted, then we're perpetuating this even further.
Yeah,
so we've got hence using a fork for soup instead of actually realizing we need a spoon.
Because the thing with this is, Maajid, that even with the Matrix, the person writing it is saying what? The binary.
Yeah.
So it's not the idea of if we go to, let's go to something universal that everyone, so if we use, I'm going to throw out a few characters. So we'll say Buddha and we'll use Jesus. Yeah, because from an Islamic perspective, we understand that Jesus represents the concept of the Word of God, and then we've got
Spirit,
the Spirit. So, and then we've got, from a Christian perspective, we've got the idea of an avatar concept, and then we'll use Buddha there as well for this idea of, if you've got evil's there for the opportunity to bring good, for you to be the one that brings the good, and in bringing that good, the intention itself fills you with, we want to use from a Western perspective, the Holy Ghost, this idea of compassion, this idea of connecting to alleviate suffering. If we want to talk about from a Buddhist perspective of connecting into the Dharma nature, and we know from an Islamic perspective that if you want to know the infinite, you have to know you can only love through loving who Allah loves. And hence, when we have that concept of Muhammadur Rasulullah, this idea of going with that concern. Yeah. Now, the point is, is that binary? Yeah, light and dark. Oh, light and dark is too obvious. It's too simple. But the problem is, if you bring it back to the self, and I say to you, well, you know what? I want to eat this, and you go, well, but no one else eats it. And you go, yeah, but I want to eat it. And you go, yeah, but it's poisonous. Now, well, I've sent that berry to a lab for them to come up with one that isn't poisonous. You go, well, why don't you just rely on human history?
Why don't you just eat a berry that we've been eating for a while?
Yeah. Why don't you just get on with you? Why don't you get on with reality?
Yeah.
Instead of trying to delude yourself.
And, you know, I had this. It's so interesting you give that example. I had this conversation with my boy, who's 6, the younger one, while eating some grapes, believe it or not. And what happened was, usually when I buy these grapes, I usually try and buy from a local business that is organic, that is these Turkish run stores, you know, the Turkish organic stores that we have. I try not to buy from the chains. I try not to buy from the big supermarkets. I try and support family businesses where I can. And these Turkish organic stores across London, I don't know if they're anywhere else, but we have them. And they're pretty much like in the US context in New York City, a bodega. They sell everything, but known for their organic produce. And so I bought some red grapes from there. And my boy comes and sits down on my lap. And he said, Abu, Dad, next time, can you buy some seedless grapes? Because he's eating grapes for me. I say, sure, son, you know, if you like seedless grapes, I'll buy them for you. And I'm sorry that these aren't seedless, but that's only because when I go to buy seedless grapes, sometimes they only have the seeded ones, and that's what I buy because there's no other seedless option left. And however, and then I began having a conversation with him. The reason it's important to not switch produce and buy fruit with seeds in it, even if your children prefer grapes without seeds, which most kids, and I remember when I was young, I did, is what I explained to him. I said, son, listen, these seeds here, right here on the table that I've just pulled out of my mouth while I'm eating the grapes that are on this tissue here, these seeds are the seeds that grow the grape. Now, if all of us give our business to the farmer who's growing grapes with no seeds, one day in an emergency, when the food, if it's running short like we had during COVID, because of an entirely manufactured crisis, real food shortages were occurring due to the ports shutting down in China and other places. So I said, son, one day you're gonna realize that if we all sent our business to this person growing grapes with no seeds, if there are food shortages, we wouldn't be able to acquire the seeds to replant the plants and to regrow our own produce. And then I pointed to him like this little strawberry pot that we're growing little strawberries in. He got the point. Now, for a 6-year-old, it was sufficient to talk about it from a context of the planet and caring for the planet. But for everybody here, and sorry to interject with you there, bro, but for everybody listening, the context here goes a bit deeper. And that is because people like Bill Gates are filing for patents on things like engineering nature, whether it's bioengineered mosquitoes, whether it's bioengineered plants and foods, whether they want you to eat bugs. Keep in mind that if technocratic altering through DNA procedures, whatever, of plants and other produce and fake meat, lab-grown meat, can be owned by a business, then if you're paying people to set wildfires in order to acquire land, such as Bill Gates has already been doing in America, by the way, not the fire setting, the acquiring of the land, to buy up chunks of farmland so that other people don't have access to farmland, and you raise the prices of all that farmland, so people trying to flee the cities and cash in, such as the father in the movie 8 Mountains, which is a great movie. Everyone needs to see it, because they dream of living closer to reality, closer to mountains, closer to trees and greenery. They cash out in their city homes and try and buy farmland, right? But Bill Gates has bought up all that farmland, so you can't even plant seeds anymore. Meanwhile, while you can't plant seeds anymore because you can't afford farmland, he's investing, true, in factories that are making fake lab-grown food. You can see the danger of only buying that fruit that has no seeds in it. You can see the direction of travel. I didn't go into all of that with my 6-year-old. I stopped at, we should care for the planet, so we should sometimes buy fruit with seeds in it in case we need to replant it someday. But there's a serious point behind all of these points.
Yeah.
And it just reminded me of it when you said about the berry and why don't you eat the normal berry that everyone else has been eating. There's a practical lesson there for people in the very seemingly mundane example of seedless grapes.
Yeah, but the thing with this is, Maajid, that what we're talking about is it's a very core point, because what we're saying is that, look, the conclusion that you're coming to is a product of the way that you've been taught. Yeah. So if everything that I'm strategizing to do, like a 9/11, yeah. So when a 9/11,
which you're not for the purpose of anyone cutting us out of context.
no, I'm not talking about conspiracy here.
No, I'm saying you're not strategizing to do a 9/11.
Post the event. Yeah, because what happens is it's not about was there a conspiracy to do it. It's got nothing to do with that. It's like me sitting here and going, you know what? As soon as there's a fire, I'm gonna make sure that there's. I'm gonna get my wife to. I'm gonna use the argument to put a steam room downstairs. Do you see what I mean? So it's like, and you're saying, well, chances are there isn't going to be a fire, and I'm like, but if there is, I go, yeah, but if there is, yeah. And then all of a sudden it happens, and all of this infrastructure is brought in. Now, the point is with this that when we get into this poking and prodding and methodology of how people have how we've got to where we are now.
Yeah.
If we look at the world wars, World War One, after it happened, we saw the great dynasties get shut down. The Ottomans, the Habsburgs, all of this got shut down. Yeah. And then we see a movement into a new sphere. But the other thing with this is, if you look behind it, you see people making money. And if you follow the money, you get to a certain point. Now what we do is we've actually got a shift over to different people making money. Because what ends up happening is you can be the mafia for so long until maybe the walls on the Eastern Bloc come down and you end up with tougher gangsters that have turned up now and they take over your patch. Yeah. Now what it is now we've got the digital mafia in a sense. Now we've got the tech mafia. Yeah. So when we see the likes of the Bill Gates, the Elon Musks, and these are the faces that we see. I'm always looking at, okay, well, is it real what we see? What is behind? What is behind the puppet? Do you see what I mean? Is this are we in the time that Pharaoh shows his face, or are we just seeing a spokesman at the front? Because anyone who's worked within government now, you see, when we're talking, we're not talking from a perspective of research papers. We're actually talking from a perspective of being within the government structure. And
that's why I read the LAPD chief's name when you reference it. People need to understand we're talking about this having lived it.
Having lived and having been there. Yeah, Maajid, I was there at West Point when
Military Academy.
West Point Military, keynote speaker at West Point Military Academy, where in a meeting, I'm not going to mention the names, but an individual came out at the front and explained about how Anwar Ulaki had prophesied, these are not my words, about what would happen in Iraq and the formation of groups. And he came on, he did his talk, and it was called Plato to NATO. Yeah. And I mean, I can imagine the course is very interesting, the Plato to NATO thing. But the point being with this, that he was saying that you can see the ramifications, because cause and effect is exactly how we strategize. Yeah. Cause and effect is exactly how we strategize. Now, the point is with this, that when we're looking at cause and effect, what ends up happening is you might have come in at the ground floor with a project and think that you are essential to that project. And that can happen with a nation state. Yeah, that can happen with a nation state. Remember, Jimmy Hoffa, the Teamsters.
Yeah.
Yep.
As featured in Scorsese's recent 3-hour movie.
The Irishman, yeah. So that's actually what I'm referencing from. But the Teamsters was a grassroots movement that was smashed. Yeah, as much as you can point to whatever corruption you want to talk about with the Teamsters, it still took care of the man on the ground. Yeah. But come the Reagan era, that period wiped away, smashed. All the trade unions gone. Yeah. So we have the taking away of collective power at the grassroots. Yeah. And also collectivism given a name or an accusation in a sense of Marxism or communism. Because what happens is they don't just want to throw out the bathwater, they want to throw out the baby. Yep, the baby.
Meanwhile, by the way, collectivism is bad if common everyday people get together to work together locally for their local solutions, but it's fine for this cabal to work collectively at the top and implement lockdowns, vaccine mandates, mask mandates, and all that other bullshit in synchronicity across the entire planet at the same time. That kind of collectivism is okay.
No, but that's the whole point, Maajid, because what we've got with this
everything is appropriated.
The strategy of being human.
Yeah.
So what's understood with this is that the strategy of any human power comes through collectivism. The Mongolians, scattered tribes on the steppe, and then all of a sudden
Genghis Khan.
Yeah. And then we have the entire world being invaded. Yeah. Now, what we get with this is collectivism has always been recognized from that point of view, but the dismantling of collectivism, the empowering of individualism to the point of the empowering of consumerism. You have to remember that the capitalist model and constant expansion of the capitalist model relies on what, Maajid? It relies on you agreeing that you want this thing or thinking that you need the thing, not even want it, thinking that you need what you want and not knowing what you actually need. Yeah. So you think you need what you want. Now, what ends up happening with this need is that next to what you want is also put scarcity. Constantly this idea of there's not enough water, there's not enough air, there's not enough food, so now there's not enough jobs. They, so that they can be
divide and conquer again.
Yeah. So, but what we get with this is constant separation, where as soon as we start running out of labels, we bring in new labels. We bring in LGBTQ, ABCDEFG, HIJK, yeah. So we end up with multiple intersectionalities. Yeah. Add on top of that religion, which is excellent because it's like, don't worry if you're not happy because you can get it in the next life.
Religion is the appropriation of oneness, or tawheed, for those of you who understand the Arabic reference to oneness. Religion was the tactic of empire to appropriate the true message of the prophets, oneness and one love and light and unity, to appropriate that for the purposes of power. Empire concocted and invented religion. That's just a historical fact.
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? Because what happens is if you've got religion and imagination, everyone's in this mode of my book is right, and after I die, I'm going to end up here. Then what happens if you've got this thing where actually the methodology itself is about alleviating suffering? You see, there's a problem now because when you get to alleviate suffering, you get away from this idea of labels. And you now get to this takes us back to our beginning point with 9/11. It takes us back to what the reality of cause and effect actually is. And that is pain, that is suffering. And the Nazis came about. Why? Because Hitler used the excuse of the humiliation of Germany. Yeah. And the point is with this, can you collectively punish a group, or is the collective label itself a misnomer? Because what you end up with this is it always comes back to a singular. If it's a singular individual with the ends justifies the means. Yeah. Now the problem is that the problem that we've got now is that the globalists, when you've got this concept of the globalist, you've got the World Health Organization putting across this idea that, look, unless we do this, we'll get this. So the end point is that everyone's secure. And this is why we need to do, and then put into the blank spot whatever activity it is they want you to do. And then what ends up happening is, because you're constantly, and remember the warrior creed point that we've made, because you're living within that sympathetic system, yeah, you're so happy to be like, yeah, to get the 1 minute break when the bell rings.
Yeah. So
you get the 1 minute break.
You sit prisoners. You take everything away, and then you slowly introduce one thing at a time. First, a toilet break. After they've been in solitary confinement, which I have for 3 months, you slowly introduce one thing at a time. Was it 4 months? Whatever. Toilet break, and then food frequency increases, like instead of once a day, twice a day, then 3 times, until the point is that the person has learned their lesson and behaves because they're grateful for their privileges returning one by one.
And this is the point now, that all of this is justified where in the same place that you are investigating what happened in 9/11, COVID, all of this. And we're not talking about not investigating, we're talking about being response able. Yeah, with what we do with Warrior Creed, we're not coming from we're not ex-comedians, or I don't know, still comedians, and we're not multi-millionaire presenters.
And we're not seeking a political office.
Not seeking, yeah. This is literally a work of passion. This is what, yeah, and
on that note, works of passion, because it's been an hour and a half already, bro. On that note, works of passion, allow me to show you my own photograph that I took as a work of passion while being driven by my in-laws through the great state of Alabama. There is Big Mike's Steakhouse. I took that photo from my own phone, and it's a real place, Big Mike's Steakhouse. As you can see there, it says "Earn Trust" next to it. Storage. I bet you there's a lot of storage there with Big Mike. So basically, if you want your 2 eggs and steak, then that's where you can go, Big Mike's Steakhouse. But before I, sorry,
this is the thing.
After people don't even know what we're talking about.
I think the thing is now, I think the last point to bring.
Yeah. Because I've got to give a little advert for what I'm doing next week.
A quick wrap up with this is that, look, guys, me and Maajid will remember when Golden Wonder crisps, Wonder crisps, salt and vinegar was blue.
Yeah.
Salt and vinegar was blue.
Golden Wonder, salt and vinegar were nice crisps.
Yeah, and cheese and onion were green.
Walkers, you can't even get Golden Wonder anymore.
Yeah, and I remember when I was in hospital for some family relative or whatever, and my uncle goes, "Okay, what do you want?" I said, "Okay, get me a pack of salt and vinegar crisps." He comes back, I open up the pack of crisps without looking at them, put a crisp in my mouth, and it's bloody cheese and onion. Yeah, because Walkers had been introduced.
Yeah,
now it is understood by society that blue represents cheese and onion, and green represents
salt and vinegar.
Salt and vinegar, yep.
Now, used to be Golden Wonder. Salt and vinegar was what?
Yeah, salt and vinegar was blue.
Like real McCoys still keep it blue, but it's not known. It's known as green, isn't it?
It's known as green. Now the point is with this, that this takes us back to the Matrix again, doesn't it, Maajid? Because now, if we're talking about the logic of what it is to be what you think it, male, female, whatever, in whatever concept, but because what we've got now is that if you live in India, when someone dies, they wear white. If you up here, some people wear black. Pink in India, and that region is actually considered a masculine color. It's not considered feminine.
And in England, men wear pink shirts, but nowhere else.
Yeah. So you have this thing when when you are coming to a conclusion, in the words of the late great Robert Anton Wilson, yeah, you are always following someone's BS, someone's belief system, someone's bullshit.
Yeah.
The map is not the territory.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the point is with this, like, take it and feel empowered. What you've been told doesn't take away from you, actually empowers you now.
Good point to end on. Now, on that note, bro, just quickly, and you will be hearing this for the first time as well. Next Tuesday, 19th of September, I'll be in Bath for this because I've been asked by the World Council for Health to moderate this conversation. And that is a conversation between the co-founder and head of the World Council for Health, Dr. Tess Lawrie there on the right, and Dr. Peter McCullough, the world-renowned cardiologist. I think he cites himself as, at least, the most published cardiologist in his field in history. I've interviewed both of them for The Radical Show and obviously recently with Dr. Tess Lawrie on the Premium Radical podcast on Radical Media, which you can find via maajidnawaz.substack.com. But for The Radical Show, they're both on the Odyssey channel. Now, I'll be interviewing them live as the moderator for this conversation this coming Tuesday, 7 p.m. for a 7:30 p.m. start in Bath of City, the old Roman city of Bath in the United Kingdom, 19th of September there. And you can see the details for the tickets, £55. I've got no financial interest in this. I should declare I'm doing this voluntarily. I am hosting this in kind. So I'm not selling you anything by showing you that post. I'm saying if you're in the area or can get to the area, do see, you can probably look this up via the World Council for Health website. Only 100 tickets are available, but do feel free to, if you're interested, to go to the World Council for Health website and purchase those tickets. There'll be a conversation around the COVID mandates where we've got to up until and including the World Council for Health attempt to impose COVID mandates globally at their whim, and Biden's attempts to reintroduce vaccines. That's all this coming Tuesday. What that means, bro, is they're booking me into a hotel there. I'll be broadcasting Warrior Creed from the hotel room. So I've asked them that I go early. And then so next week's viewers, this is why I'm mentioning it, will see me back in a hotel room again, not in this studio. But that's where we'll be back for the next time for the regular weekend, for Warrior Creed next Tuesday at 3 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. EST on Rumble with my bro Usman Raja and me as usual, bringing you the latest on all of the goings on during the week, current events, and I'm sure being September, current events are going to heat up as they usually do. Bro, any last words before we go?
No, well, hopefully people don't get sucked into. Sit down and think about what we talked about with democratization of information and the idea that, do you want to be part of the mob or do you and get hustled, or do you want to step out, knock on your neighbor's door and find out if they've got food or not, or whether they're depressed? Go and have a cup of tea with someone. Happens.
So I see.
That's not the revolution.
All right. Till next week.
Now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.